welcome to another Unstuck Careers Leadership Moment. My name is Mark Wavell, and today I'd like to explore with you the power of ownership. The hypothesis here is that you will get better results and better motivation from people who have a strong sense of ownership of the work that they're doing. And I'd like to explore this with you using three questions. First, what does it look like when we don't have ownership? Second, what does it look like when there is a strong sense of ownership? And the third is, how do we build it? So let's get started. What is the opposite of ownership? The opposite of ownership for you as a leader is that you are giving solutions, you're giving goals, you're essentially taking control, and you're handing things down to people and saying, here, do this, or here, head in this direction. That is not going to build a sense of ownership, and that's the opposite of that. The word that I think describes it probably best is rentership. To the people who you're leading, if they don't have a strong sense of ownership, then they're renting the things that you've handed them, right? The goals you've given them, the solutions you've given them, they're just renting. Like if you were renting an apartment and the hot water heater broke, what would you do? You're not going to fix it. You're going to call the landlord. It's not your hot water heater. So at most, you're going to call the landlord. Or maybe at worst, you sit there and complain about the landlord. Man, can you believe the landlord and the hot water heater they put in here? This is not a good hot water heater. And if that's what you're starting to see, it might be a sign that you have some ownership issues there. All right, so what does it look like if we build ownership? The first thing that we'll see is self-accountability, where people are holding themselves to account. They're taking responsibility for themselves and their actions. And you'll see that also when you're working in team structures, that the teams will take responsibility and accountability themselves for doing things, for getting places, because they have a sense of ownership about it. It's like a picture of a sports team that cares, that players and the team care about winning that game. They're going to take accountability for what they have done and haven't done. And that's what you're trying to build. The other thing that you'll get is really amazingly powerful, and that is resilience. This is like self-healing, self-improving. It's a really important quality of that, where you will see people and teams who have a strong sense of ownership when something doesn't work perfectly. And if you're in complexity and uncertainty, it's a guarantee that it's not going to be perfect. Then they will ask themselves, what could we do to make that better? Notice how different that is. The opposite of that is it's the landlord's problem, right? They're going to figure out how to get there. That's what I want to build with the people and teams that I'm working with. All right, so how do we go about building that? I'm going to give you two stops and two starts. So the first thing to stop or resist is resist the urge to cascade goals and cascade solutions. Think about that picture for a moment. Cascade, it's like a waterfall, right? There's water rushing over the top of something and it looks beautiful. What does it look like at the bottom? It looks like a pounding, fierce, destructive force at the bottom. And to the people who are receiving your cascaded goals or solutions, that's what it's like. It's very forceful and it's very powerful. And so resist the urge to cascade those goals. I'll give you the flip side of that in a moment. The other thing to resist here is to resist the urge to solve problems for your people and for your teams. It may seem you're trying to be helpful. It may seem like the most helpful thing. If you're trying to build ownership, it actually can undermine what you're trying to build with ownership. So how do we do this? Let's start by involving people through collaboration. Get them in the conversation, right? Involve them in understanding what's going on, or involve them in making the decision or giving input into it. Any involvement, any increase in that direction is going to increase their sense of ownership. And if you're not sure how to increase that collaboration, and use some facilitation techniques. Liberating structures would be a tremendous place to start, a library of really helpful structures for that. The second thing I'd recommend is to increase involvement through delegation. So how can you enable them to make decisions or be more involved in the decisions? I love delegation poker if for no other reason than the nuance of the 7 levels of delegation that are in there. So take a look at that in delegation poker if you're not familiar. But how can you move a step closer, right? From instead of just telling them and cascading something, involve them, help them understand why, or ask for their input, or even let's make the decision together. And then maybe you could move to you can make the decision and get my input on it. And eventually they may graduate to just being able to make the decision themselves. And that's that resilience, that ownership and resilience you're really trying to build. So here's a good self-coaching question or curiosity question you could ask yourself. Do I hear the people I'm leading complaining about goals and solutions that I give to them? Or do I hear nothing about them? Do I hear them throwing problems back to me as the landlord? Or do I hear them and see them coming up with solutions and options and opportunities to address those? And that can really help you see what sense of ownership you've got there and consider ways to increase ownership for better results. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it, and we'll see you next time on an Unstuck Leadership Moment.